Welcome to Midnight Truth, where peaceful stories guide you into the perfect night's rest. Before we start, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps me bring more soothing stories to you and others who need them. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, find your cozy spot, close your eyes, and let's begin this calming journey together. I never thought I'd end up here. Not in this town, not in this house. But life has a way of pushing you into corners you didn't know existed. After the divorce, I needed a fresh start. Somewhere quiet, somewhere affordable. That's how I found myself standing in front of 42, Ravenwood Lane, an old Victorian house that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a Gothic novel. The realtor, a wiry man with thinning hair and a nervous laugh, handed me the keys with a flourish. "It's got character," he said, as if that made up for the sagging porch or the peeling paint around the windows. I forced a smile and nodded, pretending I wasn't already regretting my decision. Inside, the air smelled musty, like damp wood and something faintly metallic. Sunlight filtered through dusty curtains, casting long shadows across warped floorboards. It wasn't exactly homey, but it was mine, at least for now. Unpacking took most of the day. Boxes piled high in every room, their contents spilling out onto tables and chairs. My cat, Milo, prowled cautiously, his tail flicking as he explored the creaky hallways. By the time night fell, I was exhausted. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the cracked plaster ceiling while Milo curled up beside me. That's when I heard it. The first sound that would change everything. A soft creak, like someone shifting their weight on the stairs. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses do that, right? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, I met Mrs. Hargrove, the elderly woman who lived next door. She leaned heavily on her cane as she shuffled over to greet me, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of my appearance. "You're renting the old Carter place?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of disapproval. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. It seemed reasonable. Mrs. Hargrove frowned, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Reasonable doesn't mean safe," she muttered under her breath. Then louder, "You know about the history of that house, don't you?" I shook my head, suddenly uneasy. "No, what history?" She hesitated, glancing back at her own tidy porch before leaning closer. "Bad things happen there. People say the Carters dabbled in things they shouldn't have. Rituals, curses, the kind of stuff that gives people nightmares. One tenant ran screaming into the street years ago, said she heard voices telling her to leave. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I laughed it off. Sounds like ghost stories to me." Mrs. Hargrove didn't look amused. "Maybe," she said, "but be careful. Some stories are rooted in truth." For the first few days, I tried to convince myself that Mrs. Hargrove's warning was nothing more than superstition. Sure, the house was old, and yes, it groaned and creaked at odd hours, but that was normal, wasn't it? Every house had its quirks. My routine quickly fell into place. Morning started with coffee brewed in the tiny kitchen, where the faucet dripped incessantly no matter how tightly I turned it off. Afternoons were spent unpacking boxes or wandering through town, familiarizing myself with the local shops and cafes. Evenings were quieter. I'd sit by the window with a book, watching the sun dip below the horizon while Milo lounged nearby. But then came the nights. At first, it was subtle, a faint tapping against the walls, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. I chalked it up to tree branches brushing against the siding. Then there were the cold spots, areas of the house where the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees without explanation. One evening, as I lay in bed reading, I felt a draft creep across my ankles. I glanced toward the window, certain I'd left it closed. It was shut tight, the curtains unmoving, yet the chill persisted, wrapping itself around me like icy fingers. Milo darted under the bed, hissing, a rare display of fear from him. I sat up, heart pounding, and scanned the room. Nothing looked out of place. The shadows cast by the bedside lamp danced innocently on the walls. "It's just your imagination," I whispered to myself, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. By morning, the incident felt distant, almost dreamlike. I convinced myself it was stress catching up with me. Moving to a new town, starting over. It was enough to unnerve anyone. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. It was the third night in the house when things took a turn. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from another day of unpacking and trying to make sense of my new life. The house was silent, or so I thought. At first, it was just the usual creaks and groans, the kind that made me roll over and mutter about old houses being dramatic. But then came the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and unmistakably real. Each step echoed to the hallway outside my bedroom door, like someone pacing back and forth. My heart thudded in my chest as I sat up, clutching the blanket around me. "Milo," I called softly, hoping he'd wandered out of the room and was responsible for the noise. No response. He was curled up at the foot of the bed, his ears perked but his body tense, staring at the closed door. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a faint whisper, so soft I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it. It came from somewhere beyond the door, a voice too indistinct to understand. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was probably just the wind or some trick of the house settling. That's what people always say, right? Old houses are full of weird noises. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. This felt intentional, summoning what little courage I had left. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand. The beam flickered weakly as I crept toward the door, my bare feet freezing against the cold floorboards. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. The air smelled stale, tinged with something sour I couldn't quite place. The stairs loomed ahead, their shadows stretching impossibly long under the dim light. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound confident. There was no answer, only the faint hum of the house itself, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to pulse through the walls. I stepped into the hallway, shining the flashlight in both directions. Nothing moved. No one was there. Still, the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to go back to bed, lock the door, and pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't, not yet, not until I knew for sure. As I turned to head back to my room, something brushed past me, a cold rush of air that sent goosebumps racing up my arms. I spun around, heart pounding, but the hallway remained empty. Whatever it was gone now. By morning, I was determined to find answers. If this house really did have a dark history, I wanted to know everything about it. Mrs. Hargrove's warning lingered in my mind, along with her cryptic mention of rituals and curses. Was she just an eccentric neighbor spinning tales? Or was there truth to what she'd said? I started with the library downtown, a small brick building tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. Inside, the librarian, a wiry woman with glasses perched precariously on her nose, pointed me toward a dusty corner filled with local history books and newspapers. It didn't take long to find references to the Carters. According to old articles, they had been one of the wealthiest families in town during the late 1800s. Their patriarch, Nathaniel Carter, was described as a reclusive man obsessed with the occult. Rumors swirled about secret meetings held in the basement of their home, where strange symbols were carved into the walls and incantations whispered in languages no one recognized. One article stood out, a grainy photograph accompanied by a headline that read, Asterisk, Carter family vanishes without trace. Asterisk beneath, it was a brief account of how Nathaniel and his wife disappeared one winter night, leaving behind their young daughter, who was found wandering the woods days later, muttering about the ones who wait. Chills ran down my spine as I read the details. The girl had been institutionalized shortly after, deemed unfit to testify about what had happened to her parents. Over the years, the house changed hands multiple times, each tenant reporting increasingly bizarre occurrences before fleeing in terror. Back at home, I scoured the attic, hoping to find something tangible, proof that these stories weren't just urban legends. It didn't take long. Buried beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets and broken furniture, I discovered a leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, yellow with age, but the handwriting inside was clear enough to decipher. Nathaniel Carter himself had written it. Entry after entry detailed his experiments with rituals meant to unlock hidden truths and commune with forces beyond mortal comprehension. One passage sent a shiver down my spine. Asterisk, they speak to me in whispers, promises of power and knowledge, but they demand a price. Blood must flow for the veil to thin. Tonight, I shall offer them my devotion and perhaps my soul. Asterisk, I slammed the book shut, my hand shaking. Whatever Nathaniel had summoned, it hadn't left with him, and now it seemed it was still here. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house sounded louder, every shadow darker. I kept replaying Nathaniel's words in my mind, imagining unseen eyes watching me from the corners of the room. Around midnight, I heard again the footsteps. This time, they were closer, moving steadily toward my bedroom. My pulse quickened as I grabbed the flashlight once more, ready to confront whatever or whoever was out there. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty, or so I thought. As I stepped into the corridor, a figure darted past the edge of my vision, a fleeting glimpse of pale skin and wide, hollow eyes. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. Panic surged through me. I backed into my room, slamming the door shut and pressing my back against it. Milo leapt onto the bed, his fur bristling as he let out a low growl. And then I heard it, the whisper, clearer this time, right beside my ear. Asterisk, leave. Asterisk. The word was sharp, commanding. It wasn't my imagination. It couldn't be. Someone or something was in the room with me. I bolted upright, scrambling for the light switch. The sudden brightness revealed nothing unusual, just my cluttered bedroom, the same as always, yet the oppressive weight in the air remained, heavier than ever. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat huddled on the bed, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline, listening to the house breathe around me. The next morning, I woke up feeling more exhausted than when I'd gone to bed. My body ached from sitting upright all night, clutching the flashlight like it was some kind of talisman against whatever lingered in the shadows. Sleep hadn't come, not really. Every creak of the house had sounded louder, every shadow darker. Even Milo seemed restless, pacing around the room with his tail puffed up like a bottle brush. I dragged myself out of bed and shuffled into the kitchen, where sunlight streamed through the grimy windows. For a brief moment, the house almost felt normal, just another old building settling into its foundation. But the illusion shattered the second I stepped on a loose floorboard near the sink. It groaned loudly, and the sound reverberated through the walls like a warning. That's when I noticed the cold spot again. This time, it wasn't subtle. A patch of air near the doorway radiated icy tendrils that wrapped around my ankles, making me shiver despite the warmth of the day. I knelt down, waving my hand through the space, half expecting to feel something solid. Nothing, just empty air, but colder than it should have been. Curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't keep ignoring these strange occurrences. If there was something wrong with this house, and everything pointed to yes, then I needed answers, and answers meant digging deeper. My thoughts drifted back to Nathaniel Carter's journal, which I had left on the dining table after fleeing the basement last night. Its pages were filled with cryptic notes about rituals and symbols, but one detail stood out: the mention of a hidden chamber beneath the house. He referred to it as the gateway, though he never explained what lay beyond it. Whatever it was, it clearly terrified him. But before I could confront the basement again, or even consider opening any gates, I decided to tackle the attic. Maybe there were clues up there, remnants of previous tenants or artifacts left behind by the Carters themselves. Anything that might shed light on what was happening now. The attic door was tucked away at the end of the upstairs hallway, partially obscured by a moth-eaten tapestry hanging from the ceiling. When I pushed it aside, the scent of dust and decay wafted out, mingling with a faint aroma of lavender. Someone must have tried to mask the smell with sachets years ago. I climbed the narrow staircase slowly, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. At the top, I found myself in a dimly lit space cluttered with forgotten belongings. Old trunks lined the walls, their brass fittings tarnished with age. Dust motes floated lazily in the slanted beams of sunlight streaming through cracks in the roof. As I began sifting through the contents of the trunks, I discovered items that hinted at lives long past. Yellowed letters tied with ribbon, faded photographs of people whose names I didn't recognize, and delicate porcelain figurines wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Most of it was harmless enough, a time capsule of sorts, but one item caught my attention immediately. It was a small wooden box, intricately carved with swirling patterns that matched the symbols in Nathaniel's journal. The lid was slightly ajar, revealing a bundle of brittle papers inside. Carefully, I lifted them out and unfolded the top sheet. It was a map of the property, marked with strange notations and excess in red ink. One location stood out, a spot labeled simply as the Vale. A chill ran down my spine as I traced the markings with my finger. Was this the same place Mrs. Hargrove had mentioned? The woods where Nathaniel's daughter had been found wandering, muttering about the ones who wait? If so, it raised more questions than answers. I tucked the map into my pocket and continued exploring. In another trunk, I found a leather-bound photo album. Flipping through its pages, I saw images of the Carter family posing stiffly in front of the house. Nathaniel himself appeared gaunt and severe, his eyes hollow and haunted. His wife, dressed in layers of dark fabric, looked equally uncomfortable, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Their daughter, however, was different, her expression bright and carefree, as if she hadn't yet realized the darkness surrounding her. The final photograph stopped me cold. It showed only the house, taken at an angle that captured both the front porch and part of the wood behind it. Standing among the trees was a figure, indistinct, blurry, but unmistakably human-shaped. Yet no one else was in the frame. No photographer, no bystanders. Just the house, the woods, and the shadowy form watching silently. I slammed the album shut, my pulse racing. Whoever, or whatever, that figure was, it didn't belong there. Not unless they'd been standing perfectly still while the picture was taken. And judging by the way the branches swayed in the background, that wasn't likely. By late afternoon, I knew I couldn't avoid the basement forever. The cold spot in the kitchen grew stronger with each passing hour, spreading outward until it reached the edges of every room. It felt like the house itself was breathing, drawing energy from somewhere deep below. With trembling hands, I grabbed the flashlight and descended the stairs once more. The temperature plummeted instantly, and frost coated the walls like veins of ice. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, pulsating in time with a low hum that filled the air. This time, I approached the altar cautiously, keeping my distance. On closer inspection, I realized the stains weren't just dry blood. They formed patterns too, matching the carvings etched into the wood. They spelled out words in Latin. Asterisk, adveniat regnum tuum. Asterisk, thy kingdom come. Suddenly, the humming intensified, vibrating through my chest like a bass note. Shadows shifted along the edges of the room, coalescing into shapes that danced just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. One moved closer, a tall, spindly silhouette with elongated limbs and a featureless face. Its presence was suffocating, pressing down on me until I thought I might collapse. Panic surged through me. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the circle. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the hum cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The shadow froze mid-step, tilting its head as if confused or curious. Without thinking, I bolted the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind me, I heard the scrape of claws on stone, followed by a guttural growl that echoed through the house. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. Milo leapt onto the bed, his fur bristling as he let out a low hiss. Together, we waited, listening to the house settle, or perhaps recover, from whatever I'd disturbed. After catching my breath, I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed help, not just from Mrs. Hargrove, but from someone who understood the occult better than I did. A quick online search led me to a local historian named Dr. Evelyn Pierce, who specialized in folklore and paranormal phenomena. Her office was located above a used bookstore downtown, accessible via a winding staircase that smelled faintly of mildew. She greeted me warmly, ushering me into a cozy room lined with shelves overflowing with books and artifacts. Her sharp green eyes studied me intently as I recounted my experiences over the past few days. "You're dealing with something ancient," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. "Something tied to the land itself. These kinds of entities don't just appear, they're summoned. And once they've been called, they don't leave easily." "What do you mean?" I asked, clutching my coffee mug tightly. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Think of it like opening a door. Once it's cracked open, things can slip through. Things that don't belong here. Nathaniel Carter may have opened that door accidentally, or intentionally, but either way, he unleashed something powerful, something hungry. Can it be closed?" I pressed. "In theory, yes," she replied. "But sealing it requires undoing the ritual that opened it in the first place. You'll need specific tools, incantations, and most importantly, protection. These beings aren't known for being cooperative." Dr. Pierce handed me a list of supplies and instructions, warning me not to attempt anything without proper preparation. "And whatever you do," she added gravely, "don't go back into that basement until you're ready." Back at the house, I spent the rest of the evening gathering materials. Salt, candles, herbs. All items listed on Dr. Pierce's sheet. Each trip to the store felt like stepping outside a bubble. The world beyond seemed normal, mundane, untouched by the horrors lurking within these walls. But as soon as I returned home, the oppressive atmosphere swallowed me whole again. That night, I sprinkled salt across the thresholds of every door and window, hoping it would act as a barrier. Then I lit the candles and placed them strategically around the house, creating makeshift wards. For a while it worked. The cold spots receded and the whispers faded into silence. But as midnight approached, the house stirred once more. The lights flickered violently, plunging the rooms into darkness. From somewhere below, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps ascending the stairs. Whatever was coming, it wasn't stopping this time. The footsteps grew louder, echoing to the house like thunder. My heart pounded as I grabbed the flashlight and backed into the farthest corner of my bedroom, clutching Milo close to my chest. He hissed, his fur standing on end, mirroring my own rising panic. "Leave me alone," I shouted, though my voice trembled with fear. The footsteps paused just outside my door, and for a moment there was silence, deafening, suffocating silence. Then came the whisper again, clearer this time, slicing through the air like a blade. "Asterisk, you cannot escape." Asterisk. The words weren't spoken aloud. They reverberated inside my skull, paralyzing me with their weight. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to disappear. But when I opened them, the door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I didn't wait to see what, or who, might emerge. Grabbing the backpack I prepared earlier, filled with salt, candles, and Dr. Pierce's instructions, I bolted out of the room and down the stairs, heading straight for Mrs. Hargrove's house next door. Her porch light flickered weakly as I pounded on her door, shivering from both the chill in the night air and the terror coursing through me. After what felt like an eternity, she answered, her expression softening when she saw me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said dryly, stepping aside to let me in. Her living room was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of my own home. She gestured for me to sit, while she poured tea from a delicate china pot. For a moment, we simply sat in silence, the steam rising between us. "I need to know more about the Carters," I said finally, breaking the quiet. "What happened to them? What did they do?" Mrs. Hargrove sighed heavily, setting her cup down with a deliberate clink. "Stories get twisted over time," she began. "But some things are true. Nathaniel Carter believed he could control forces best left alone. He held seances, performed rituals, tried to summon spirits. People say he succeeded, but whatever he brought back wasn't what he expected." She paused, her gaze distant. "When the family disappeared, folks whispered about a deal gone wrong, about something taking them as payment. That poor girl, their daughter, was found wandering the woods, half mad. She kept saying they followed me. No one knows exactly what she meant, but after that, no one wanted anything to do with that house. And the tenants who came after?" I asked, leaning forward. "They all left in a hurry," she replied. Some claimed they saw figures in the windows when no one else was home. Others said they heard laughter coming from empty rooms. One man swore he woke up to find someone, or something, standing over his bed, watching him. Her words sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through me. Do you think it's still here? Whatever Nathaniel summoned. Mrs. Hargrove didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, tarnished key. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said, holding out to me. "She used to live in your house before the Carters moved in. She always said there was a secret room somewhere, a place Nathaniel sealed off after he started his experiments. If you're brave enough to look, maybe you'll find it." I took the key, its weight heavy in my hand. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," she said softly, "you deserve to know what you're dealing with. But be careful. Some doors shouldn't be open." Armed with a key and a growing sense of dread, I returned to the house. Mrs. Hargrove's warning echoed in my mind, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that the secret room might hold answers, or a way to end whatever was haunting me. I searched every inch of the house, running my hands along the walls in search of loose panels or hidden mechanisms. Hours passed with no luck, and frustration began to creep in. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed something odd in the upstairs hallway. A section of wallpaper slightly misaligned, forming a faint rectangle. Heart pounding, I pressed against it. To my surprise, the panel shifted, revealing a narrow gap behind it. Inside was a small brass lock, just big enough for the key Mrs. Hargrove had given me. With trembling fingers, I inserted it and turned. The door creaked open, revealing a cramped, dust-filled space. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its light flickering weakly as I stepped inside. The room was bare except for an old desk and a chair. On the desk lay another journal, this one smaller and bound in cracked leather. As I flipped through its pages, a chill ran down my spine. This wasn't Nathaniel's handwriting. It belonged to someone else entirely. The entry spoke of watching the Carters from afar, documenting their descent into madness. The writer claimed to have witnessed strange lights in the woods surrounding the property, shadowy figures moving through the trees, and unearthly screams echoing through the night. One passage stood out. Asterisk, "They are here, always watching, always waiting. I can feel them in the walls, in the air. They want out, and they will use anyone foolish enough to open the door." Asterisk, the final entry was dated decades ago, scrawled in frantic handwriting. Asterisk, it knows I'm writing this. It's watching me now. If anyone finds this, burn it. Burn everything. This house is cursed, and nothing good will come of staying here. Asterisk, before I could process what I'd read, the light above me flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, but the beam barely pierced the suffocating blackness. Something moved behind me, a soft rustle, like fabric brushing against wood. I spun around, heart hammering, but the doorway was empty, or so it seemed, until I saw the eyes. Two glowing orbs stared back at me from the shadows, unblinking and filled with malice. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Trapped in the tiny room, I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make sense of what was happening. The glowing eyes remained fixed on me, their intensity burning into my soul. The air grew colder, frost creeping along the edges of the floorboards. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the hum from the basement returned, louder and more menacing than ever. Desperation clawed at me. I remembered Dr. Pierce's warnings about not confronting the entity without preparation, but I had no choice. Whatever was in here with me wasn't going to let me leave, not unless I fought back. Reaching into my backpack, I pulled out the supplies I'd gathered earlier, salt candles and a piece of chalk. Ignoring the icy grip of fear tightening around my chest, I began drawing a protective circle on the floor, chanting the incantation Dr. Pierce had scribbled down for me. The Latin words felt foreign and awkward on my tongue, but I repeated them anyway, focusing all my energy on keeping the circle intact. The glowing eyes narrowed, and a low growl emanated from the darkness. Shadows swirled angrily, pressing against the barrier I created. For a moment, I thought it would break through, but then the growling stopped. The temperature stabilized, and the oppressive weight lifted slightly. Taking a shaky breath, I realized the ritual was working, at least temporarily. But I knew this wasn't a permanent solution. The entity was still here, biding its time, waiting for me to make a mistake. I scrambled to my feet and shoved the journal into my backpack, unwilling to leave any evidence behind. As I turned toward the door, it creaked open slowly, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. The glowing eyes were gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Cautiously, I stepped out of the room, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The house seemed eerily quiet, almost too quiet. Even Milo, who had been hiding under bed, emerged cautiously, his wide eyes scanning the surroundings. Back in my bedroom, I spread the contents of the backpack across the floor. Alongside the journal, I found a map I discovered in the attic. Studying it closely, I traced the markings again, focusing on the spot labeled the Vale. It was deep in the woods behind the property, marked with an ominous X. A plan began to form in my mind. If the ritual that summoned the entity originated in the woods, perhaps that's where I needed to go to undo it. Dr. Pierce had mentioned that sealing the gateway required reversing the original spell, which likely meant confronting the source directly. But first, I needed reinforcements. Returning to Dr. Pierce's office, I explained everything that happened. The hidden room, the journal, the map. She listened intently, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. "This changes things," she said finally. "If the gateway is tied to the land itself, then destroying it won't be easy. You'll need more than just protection. You'll need power." "What kind of power?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. She hesitated before responding. "Blood magic. It's risky, dangerous even, but it's the only way to anchor the reversal spell. Without it, the entity will simply find another host once you banish it." I swallowed hard, the implication sinking in. Blood magic meant sacrifice, my own blood willingly given. There was no guarantee it would work, and if it failed, the consequences could be catastrophic. But what other choice did I have? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of grim determination. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet, and for once, I welcomed the silence. It felt like a temporary truce, as though the entity was biding its time, waiting to see what I would do next. But I couldn't afford to hesitate. Every moment spent in that house was another moment closer to losing control entirely. Dr. Pierce had agreed to accompany me into the woods, bringing along her own supplies, protective charms, herbs, and a ceremonial dagger etched with runes. She warned me repeatedly about the risks involved, not just from the entity itself, but from the ritual's unpredictable nature. Blood magic was volatile, she said, and even the smallest mistake could have dire consequences. We set out just before sunset, armed with flashlights, salt, and the map I'd found in the attic. The air was thick with humidity, and the forest loomed ahead like a living thing, its twisted branches clawing at the sky. As we crossed the boundary between the yard and the trees, an oppressive weight settled over us, pressing down on our shoulders like a physical force. "This is it," Dr. Pierce murmured, glancing around nervously. "Can you feel it?" I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The energy here was palpable, wrong, unnatural. The woods seemed alive in a way that defied logic, the shadows shifting subtly even when there was no breeze. My flashlight beam danced across gnarled roots and moss-covered rocks, illuminating patches of ground that looked untouched by human hands. Using the map as a guide, we navigated deeper into the forest, following faint trails marked by ancient stone markers half buried in leaves and dirt. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself resisted our intrusion. Milo trotted beside me, his ears flat against his head and his tail tucked low, a rare display of fear from him. Finally, we reached the spot labeled the Vale. It was a clearing surrounded by towering oak trees, their gnarled roots forming a natural barrier around the edges. At the center stood a weathered stone altar, cracked and stained with something dark and dried. Carved into its surface were symbols identical to those in Nathaniel Carter's journal, the same swirling patterns that pulsed faintly under the light of our flashlights. "Well," Dr. Pierce said, her voice tight with unease, "this is definitely the place. Equals equals." We worked quickly, setting up protective circle around the altar using salt and chalk. Dr. Pierce chanted softly under her breath, weaving a shield of energy meant to keep the entity at bay while we performed the ritual. I lit candles placed at cardinal points within the circle, their flames flickering weakly despite the lack of wind. As she worked, I studied the altar more closely. Beneath the carvings, faint scratches covered the surface. Words scrawled hastily in Latin. They read, asterisk non tibi sed illis. Asterisk not yours, but theirs. What does that mean? I asked, pointing to the inscription. Dr. Pierce frowned, tracing the letters with her finger. It's a warning or maybe a plea. Whoever wrote this knew they were dealing with something beyond their control. They tried to distance themselves, to make it clear they weren't responsible. Her words sent a chill down my spine. If even Nathaniel Carter had been afraid of what he unleashed, then what chance did we have? Once the preparations were complete, Dr. Pierce handed me the ceremonial dagger. Its blade gleamed dully in the candlelight, the runes etched along its edge glowing faintly. My hand trembled as I took it, the weight of what I was about to do settling heavily on my chest. "Are you ready?" she asked, her gaze steady but filled with concern. I hesitated, glancing toward the trees surrounding us. The shadows seemed darker now, denser, as if the forest itself was closing in. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint rustle of leaves, though no wind stirred the air. "No," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't think I have a choice." She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Then let's begin." Dr. Pierce started the incantation, her voice rising and falling in rhythmic waves. The Latin phrases rolled off her tongue effortlessly, each word resonating through the clearing like a bell tolling in the night. I joined in after a few moments, repeating the lines she'd taught me earlier. Together, our voices wove a spell designed to unravel the gateway Nathaniel had opened decades ago. The candles flared suddenly, their flames leaping high into the air before stabilizing again. The temperature plummeted, frost spreading across the ground like creeping vines. A low hum filled the clearing, growing louder with each passing second until it vibrated through my bones. And then the whispers began. They started faintly, almost imperceptibly, blending with the sound of the chanting. But soon, they grew louder, angry, guttural voices overlapping one another in cacophony of rage and despair. They spoke in languages I didn't recognize, their tones sharp and piercing. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadow detaching itself from the trees and slinking toward the edge of the circle. It was tall and spindly, its form shifting constantly, as if unable to maintain a single shape. Its eyes glowed with the same malevolent light I'd seen in the hidden room upstairs. "Stay focused," Dr. Pierce snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't break the chant." I forced myself to concentrate, clinging to the rhythm of the words as sweat dripped down my back. The entity prowled just outside the circle, testing the barrier with claws that scraped against invisible walls. Sparks flew where it touched the salt line, sizzling audibly. When the incantation reached its climax, Dr. Pierce gestured for me to step forward. With trembling hands, I raised the dagger and pressed the tip against my palm. Pain shot through me as I dragged the blade across my skin, leaving a shallow cut that welled with blood. I let the drops fall onto the altar, each one sizzling as it hit the surface. The reaction was immediate. The ground beneath us shuddered violently, and the whispers turned into screams, agonized, unearthly cries that echoed through the woods. The shadowy figure reared back, thrashing wildly as tendrils of black smoke poured from its body. Light erupted from the altar, blindingly bright, forcing me to shield my eyes. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, with a deafening roar, the entity lunged forward, breaking through the weakened barrier. Dr. Pierce shouted something I couldn't hear over the noise, throwing handfuls of salt into its path. The creature recoiled, howling in pain, but recovered quickly, advancing again with terrifying speed. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the dagger and plunged it directly into the altar, driving the blade deep into the stone. A shockwave rippled outward, knocking both of us off our feet. The entity froze mid-step, its form dissolving into wisps of smoke that spiraled upward before vanishing completely. The clearing fell silent once more. Dr. Pierce and I lay on the cold ground, gasping for breath. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, and my injured hand throbbed painfully. Milo crept cautiously to my side, nudging my arm with his nose. Did it work? I croaked. Struggling to sit up, she nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I think so. For now, at least. We gathered our things in silence and made our way back to the house, the forest eerily quiet behind us. When we reached the front door, I hesitated, staring at the peeling paint and sagging porch with newfound dread. Had we truly sealed the gateway, or had we only delayed the inevitable? Inside, the oppressive atmosphere seemed lighter, though not entirely gone. The cold spots were gone, and the whispers had ceased, at least for now. But as I climbed the stairs to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, watching and waiting. The days that followed were surreal. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the memory of the ritual haunted me. I avoided the basement and the hidden room upstairs, locking both doors securely. The house remained eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Milo, however, wasn't convinced. He refused to stay in certain rooms, hissing at empty corners and darting away from unseen threats. His behavior unnerved me, reinforcing the suspicion that whatever we'd banished hadn't been fully destroyed. One evening, as I sat by the window reading, I noticed something strange outside. The woods beyond the property line seemed darker than usual, almost as if they were swallowing the light. A figure moved among the trees, a pale, shadowy shape that disappeared as soon as I blinked. My stomach churned. Was it truly over? Or had the entity found another way to manifest? Hashtag chapter 12, departure. By the end of the week, I'd made up my mind. Staying in that house was an option, not after everything I'd seen and experienced. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, every shadow that lingered just a little too long. It all reminded me of how fragile my grip on sanity had become. Even though the ritual seemed to have worked, even though the oppressive way of the house had lifted somewhat, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only temporary, that something still lurked beneath the surface, biding its time. Packing my belongings felt surreal, like dismantling a life I barely started building. Each box I filled with clothes, books, and trinkets carried memories of the past few weeks, memories I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Milo watched silently from the couch, his tail twitching as he observed my frantic movements. He'd been unusually quiet since our return from the woods, spending most of his time perched on high surfaces or darting away from unseen threats. His behavior unnerved me more than I cared to admit. As I worked, I avoided certain parts of the house entirely. The basement, the hidden room upstairs, even the kitchen where the cold spots had first appeared. Those places felt tainted now, as if they were still holding on to pieces of whatever we tried to banish. The thought of stepping foot inside them again made my skin crawl. Mrs. Hargrove stopped by while I was loading boxes into my car. She stood at the edge of the driveway, leaning heavily on her cane, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the scene before her. "So you're leaving," she said, her tone neutral but tinged with something else, relief, maybe, or resignation. "I can't stay here," I replied, slamming the trunk shut with more force than necessary. "Not after everything that's happened." She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the house. "It's probably for the best. That place has always been trouble. Folks who live there don't tend to leave, or if they do, they don't come back right." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone or something might overhear. Some say the land itself is cursed, that Nathaniel Carter didn't summon anything new. He just woke up what was already sleeping beneath it. Whatever he unleashed, it doesn't care about walls or doors. It'll follow wherever it pleases. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the trunk to steady myself. "Do you think it's gone? What we did in the woods, is it really over?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small silver charm on a chain. "Take this," she said, pressing it into my hand. "It won't stop anything, but it might give you some warning if it comes looking for you." The charm was cool against my palm, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. I wanted to ask her more. What exactly protected against, whether she believed I was safe? But she turned and began walking back toward her house without another word. Driving away from 42, Ravenwood Lane felt like escaping a nightmare. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement as I turned onto the main road. In the rear-view mirror, the house loomed behind me, its windows staring blankly like hollow eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a pale figure standing in one of the upstairs rooms, but when I blinked, it was gone. Milo sat quietly in the passenger seat, his ears swiveling toward every sound. He hadn't made a peep since we left, which was unusual for him. Normally, he hated car rides, yowling indignantly until I let him out. But tonight, he was eerily calm, as if he understood the gravity of what we were leaving behind. The further I drove, the lighter I felt. The oppressive weight that clung to me for weeks began to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. Maybe Mrs. Hargrove was wrong. Maybe the ritual had worked. And whatever had haunted the house was truly gone. But then, just as I merged onto the highway, I heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the wind despite the closed windows and roaring engine. Asterisk will be waiting. Asterisk. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The voice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Low, guttural, layered with malice. It wasn't coming from inside the car. It was outside, somewhere in the darkness trailing behind me. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see headlights following close behind. The road was empty except for my own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and pale. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was there. I drove through the night, stopping only once to refuel and grab coffee from a gas station convenience store. The attendant gave me an odd look as I fumbled with cash, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the cup. I didn't blame him. I probably looked like hell. When dawn broke, I found myself pulling into a motel parking lot miles away from Ravenwood Lane. The neon sign above the office flickered weakly, casting an orange glow over cracked asphalt. It wasn't much, but it would do, for now. Inside my room, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle, just in case. Then I unpacked Milo's food and water dishes, setting them in a corner while he explored cautiously, sniffing every inch of the space. Finally, I collapsed onto the bed, clutching the silver charm Mrs. Hargrove had given me. For hours, I lay awake, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. Sleep eluded me, kept at bay by the nagging fear that I hadn't escaped after all, that whatever had been bound to house had simply shifted its focus, latching onto me instead. Sometime in the early afternoon, I noticed something strange about the charm. Its symbols, which had been faint and indistinct earlier, now glowed softly in the dim light of the motel room. At first, I thought it was a trick of the sun streaming through the curtains, but when I held it closer, the glow intensified, and then it vibrated. The sensation was subtle at first, like a gentle pulse against my palm, but within seconds, it grew stronger, almost painful, as if the charm itself was trying to warn me of something. I dropped it onto the bedside table, watching as the glow spread outward, illuminating the edges of the furniture and casting distorted shadows on the walls. Milo bolted under the bed, hissing furiously. My heart pounded as I backed away from the table, my eyes fixed on the charm. The vibration escalated into a low hum, similar to the one I'd heard during the ritual in the woods. Shadows danced along the ceiling, twisting and writhing like living things. Then the whispers returned. This time, they weren't outside. They were inside the room, surrounding me. Dozens of voices overlapped, speaking in languages I didn't understand. Some sounded angry, others pleading, but all carried the same underlying tone: hunger. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass ashtray, and hurled it at the charm. The impact shattered the table, scattering shards of wood and plastic across the floor. The glow faded instantly, and the whispers ceased, leaving only silence in their wake. Breathing heavily, I sank to the floor, clutching my knees to my chest. Whatever protection the charm offered, it clearly wasn't foolproof. And if it had reacted this strongly here, in a random motel room hundreds of miles away, then perhaps Mrs. Hargrove had been right all along. Whatever had been bound to the house hadn't stayed there. Over the next few days, I debated what to do next. Part of me wanted to run, to put as much distance between myself and Ravenwood Lane as possible. Another part, however, knew that running wouldn't solve anything. If the entity was truly following me, then no amount of travel would keep it at bay forever. Dr. Pierce called once, her voice tense and clipped. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual since leaving the house. I told her about the charm and the whispers in the motel room, careful not to reveal too much over the phone. Her response was cryptic, but telling. "You may have sealed the gateway," she said, "but gateways aren't the only ways these things move. Be vigilant, and don't trust anyone who claims to know more than they should." Her warning lingered in my mind as I packed to the motel room and hit the road again. Wherever I ended up next, I knew I couldn't let my guard down, not even for a second, because deep down, I understood the truth. The house might be behind me, but the haunting wasn't over. Not yet, and maybe it never would be.